There are some, what I would call load-bearing pillars in USMCA, things we don't think about in terms of our ag market access, which we've talked about, services access, a variety of things where we haven't seen issues, but where we have seen issues, we're already in process of fixing it to make sure we can get more production here in the U.S.
As you know, Mexico has consistently not lived up to its obligations under the 1944 Water Treaty with the United States. So I appreciate the work the Trump administration has done to bring them into compliance, at least on a temporary basis. But because this is for a period of 5 years, the term of 5 years to comply with the requirements of the treaty, it leaves our farmers basically high and dry, literally, when they don't comply on a regular basis. Is there any way that the joint review process can reinforce those compliance and accountability for Mexico to help safeguard our farmers in South Texas?
Well, I guess what I would say, first of all, this is largely a State Department jurisdiction issue because of the treaty, and USDA helps, and we monitor it because people have expressed interest. During the review process, it is clear from President Trump's perspective that if we want to have a beneficial trading relationship with Mexico and have some kind of arrangement with them, they also need to be playing ball on this issue. Obviously, there are border security issues. There are a variety of issues that aren't right in my wheelhouse, but the president is going to have a hard time agreeing to renewal or even revisions if Mexico isn't playing ball in all areas, and the water treaty is one of them.
So one of the things that China has done over the years is created a dependency on it for things like rare earth element processing. And now roughly 90% of the processing of rare earth occurs in China. And I know there's been some efforts made to provide alternative sources, diversification of sources for the United States and other countries. What is the status of current negotiations with China on the U.S. access to processed critical minerals and rare earths?
Well, Senator, they have committed, and they've had a commitment since last May to expedite export control process, processing export control applications for U.S. companies, including those that are routed through third countries. And so we are getting a flow of critical minerals from China. It's not as much as we would want. It's not at the pace we would want, but we are getting them. We're getting the majority of what we need. We have regular meetings and calls with Chinese officials at all levels. We, of course, maintain substantial leverage over them to make sure that they do this. We have a variety of trade tools that we've used, and some are suspended, some are in effect, that we can use to make sure that they comply. So we're getting what we need, but most importantly, we are accelerating domestic production to try to get away from that dependency.
And I presume you would answer roughly the same when it came to the active ingredients in generic pharmaceuticals.
So at this point, there aren't controls on those active ingredients, so we haven't had an issue getting those. But with the dependency, yes. In fact, you probably saw the president sent out a message last night about a trade policy he wants to implement to accelerate the production of generic pharmaceuticals here, in addition to the patented drugs that are also coming online here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Daines.
Thank you. Ambassador Greer, welcome to the committee. Good to have you here. Last November, there was a historic dinner at the White House. We had all 5 Central Asian presidents and their corresponding foreign ministers on one side of a table. I was there with the president, the vice president, Secretary Bessent, Secretary Rubio, as well as Ambassador Sergio Gore, for a historic moment there in the White House as these great Central Asian countries now are developing a much closer relationship with the United States. And as you know, geopolitically, it's such an important part of the world in a very tough neighborhood surrounded by Russia, China, Afghanistan, Iran. And as we have discussed, and by the way, one of the top issues they brought up that night at that dinner was a repeal of the antiquated Jackson-Vanik provision. It is an embarrassment the United States maintains these trade restrictions associated with Jackson Vanik on Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and now Azerbaijan. As of late last year, Azerbaijan is now officially part of what we call the C6. What used to be the C5 is now Azerbaijan, as we're pulling that group together as they work with the United States. This Jackson Vanik restriction is an ancient relic of Soviet Union days. It long ago ceased serving any useful purpose. It's become a barrier to deepening America's relationship with this most strategic region. And again, it was the issue they did bring up with President Trump when we had dinner in November. Ambassador Greer, I know you've been engaged in that part of the world, very important. Would you support the efforts to repeal these antiquated trade restrictions?
Well, Senator, thank you for your leadership on this issue, and I've spent time in this area. And if this is something that's important to Congress, my sense is that we'll be supportive. I mean, we're very focused on establishing reciprocal trade with countries. Uzbekistan has offered to open its market to us, and they've given us a very, very substantial market access offer to reduce tariffs on us during my trip that was there a couple of weeks ago. I think if this process goes along with these countries agreeing to open their markets to us, then that's a complementary effort that we could support.
Yeah, and this is tied to some Jewish immigration issues from the Soviet Union days. The embarrassing part of this is that there's 3 countries that would remain after we get this bill through. And by the way, Chris Murphy is my Democrat co-sponsor on this. It's bipartisan. But the remaining countries would be Cuba, Belarus, and North Korea. And this is the embarrassing part of the Jackson Vanik provisions. We have these countries that are working closely with us now in Central Asia and South Caucasus, and yet they're in this same list as North Korea, Cuba, and Belarus. So we hope we can get this done before the end of the year, and I appreciate your support on that. I know Secretary Rubio supports this in the administration as well. You recently traveled to Central Asia and conducted negotiations with some of our friends in that region. Could you talk a little bit about the progress that your team has made in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan?
Yes, and I'll talk about Uzbekistan first because I've interacted with that country the most. I just got back from a visit there. I met with their president and his staff. These are serious people who are changing their economy. It's much more Western-oriented. You land in Tashkent, and when you see the central square, they have a giant Coke bottle. They have got a mock-up of the Love statue from Philadelphia. This is a country that wants to be Western-oriented, not just in that kind of thing, but especially in economics. And so, like I mentioned, they have offered to open their market to us. They've given us a very robust market access offer to reduce tariffs on a number of things that are important to us. This is a country of 40 million people, which I think sometimes people forget or don't realize. So it's a real market. They're hungry for American goods, so it's a real opportunity. Kazakhstan in the area is an interesting partner, especially because they have a lot of the critical minerals that we seek. As you mentioned, it's a rough neighborhood, so I don't think we want to shift dependency from one place to Kazakhstan, but we do want to diversify, and so various parts of the administration have been working with Kazakhstan to explore critical mineral opportunities in that country.
Yeah, and they share the largest border with Russia of any country to their north, and of course China to their east, and Iran to the south in terms of overall in Central Asia. So thank you for your work in that area. I do believe, as Zbigniew Brzezinski once said, who was Jimmy Carter's national security advisor and was offered to be the advisor for Ronald Reagan, he said that Central Asia is the wine bottle and the South Caucasus are the cork. And the great work the president has done brokering the peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan, stopping a 34-year hot war, has just opened that opportunity up for us. Last, I wanted to talk briefly on palladium. There's 3 chief producers of palladium in the world. It's Russia, South Africa, and Montana. The Russians are dumping palladium below prices here in the United States. It caused 700 workers in Montana to lose their jobs at that mine. They're under the assault of Russian market manipulation to knock them out of business. This brazen assault on U.S. national security and hardworking Montana miners can't be allowed to stand. Ambassador Greer, would you support taking corrective action to end Russia's market manipulation and ensuring we get Montana miners back on the job to supply this critical mineral, made in Montana mineral, no less, and support this industry?
I am supportive. Anywhere where there's a distorted market, we want to get those fixed. We want to make sure that our miners have a level playing field, especially for a critical mineral like palladium.
Ambassador Greer, thank you.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Donald Trump campaigned for office, going out every day promising that he would lower costs for American families on day one. Then he takes office and he slaps tariffs on and off and on and off nearly every product that we import. Americans are now paying for it. Based on an analysis from the Congressional Budget Office and the Treasury Department's own numbers, Trump's tariffs are cost families an average of $1,700. And that was before his illegal war in Iran pushed prices even higher. So, Ambassador Greer, over a year ago, you sat in this very room, and my Democratic colleagues and I asked you about Trump's chaotic across-the-board tariffs and said they will drive up prices. And you said, no, we can have tariffs and lower prices. Well, now we have the receipts. So let's just clear this one up. Ambassador Greer, have Trump's tariffs increased prices for American families?
Senator, no. Core inflation fell to 2.6% year on year, much better than in January 2025.
So you're saying that what the Congressional Budget Office and the Treasury Department's own numbers, that families are paying an average of $1,700 more. Are you saying your own Treasury Department and your own Congressional Budget Office just don't know what they're talking about?
Well, I'm interested in seeing what Treasury numbers you're talking about. No one's given them to me to look at, so I want to verify those.
Actually, they've been out there in public now for at least the last 6 months. They've been widely distributed because families are paying more. And there's no serious economist around the country, there's no serious person who looks at those numbers and thinks that families are doing better. Trump's tariffs mean that families have paid, on average, $1,700 last year. And now the United States Supreme Court has said that those tariffs were illegal and that the Trump administration has to give people their money back. So far, the administration has been slow walking. Ambassador Greer, are American consumers going to get any refunds on the tariffs that were illegally collected from them?
So, Senator, when the court ruled on this, they did exactly what the Democratic attorney generals who sued asked to do, which was to give money back to the companies, foreign and domestic, that paid the tariffs. That's what Democratic attorney generals asked to do. They didn't say give it to consumers.
So that's how
they said give it to companies. So that's what we have to do.
I understand
that's what we have to do.
How they got standing. But the question I'm asking the administration, are you going to get money back to the American people who paid more? What the data show is the American people picked up about 95% of the cost of those Trump tariffs. They've paid an average of $1,700. And I just want to know if you even have the slightest effort, making even the slightest effort, to try to get some of that money back into the pockets of American families? Or does that just not matter to the Trump administration?
So what happened is the foreign and domestic importers, right, who are buying foreign goods, not goods from American workers, foreign goods made by foreign workers who had to pay a fee on those foreign goods, those foreign importers' records, domestic importers' records, they can file, they had to pay the tariff, they can get the tariff back. So, manufacturing workers' wages have gone up $2,600, way beyond what the Biden budget lab at Yale has calculated.
Actually, they haven't. What we know is that thousands of factory workers have lost their jobs. That means their incomes have gone to zero. But I take it what you're saying, I think I've got your answer here, and that is the Trump administration just doesn't care, isn't even lifting a finger to try to get one nickel of the money that was collected from consumers back into the pockets of the consumers. And that certainly is where they are right now. Instead, what you've been doing is searching for other ways to see if you can take money out of the pockets of consumers with tariffs. And just this week, you slapped on new tariffs using an obscure law from the 1930s, plus using something called Section 301. But here's my question. Ambassador Greer, if the Supreme Court strikes down your next round of tariffs, do you have a plan in place for how to return the money that American consumers pay under those tariffs, how to return that money directly to the families who pay. You can do this now. Put a plan in place. Do you have a plan in place?
Customs currently has a website to return any tariffs to the foreign importers' records or domestic importers who paid them, and they'll continue to do that.
I'm asking you about American families, the people you're supposed to be working for. Do you have any plan, if this next round of tariffs are struck down, for how you're going to get the money that is collected from American consumers back into their pockets?
The normal way that customs law worked is that the importer of record, if they pay a tariff, it's overruled, they give it back. There's never been any.
No. Look, I believe that tariffs can be used strategically, quite valuably, but what the Trump administration is doing is picking the pockets of American consumers. And after Donald Trump promised he would lower costs on day one, he puts in place tariffs that have done nothing but raise prices for consumers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, and good morning, Ambassador Greer. So, Ambassador Greer, I am firmly in the camp that, as you and I have discussed, that our trade policy should support good jobs and domestic manufacturing, and that those trade policies should have strong labor and environmental standards. I appreciate what Senator Whitehouse was saying earlier, and that for too long our trade policy has tilted too much towards making it easier for big corporations to send jobs overseas. And this is not, in my mind, a Democratic or Republican issue. I've criticized Democratic administrations as well as Republican ones for not getting this right. So with that in mind, I have two questions that I want to try to get to with you today. One is around taconite, and the other one is around sugar. And I'm going to start with taconite. So as you know, Minnesota produces nearly all of the raw taconite or iron ore pellets that goes into U.S. steel production. That industry has struggled from time to time. As I'm sure you also know, a couple months after the president took office, we saw layoffs at Hibbing Taconite and also at the Minorca mine. Maybe about 600 total jobs gone because of what's been happening. So we have an opportunity to make this right here for the workers in those mines and for those pellet plants on the Iron Range. And I think that we ought to be able to find some agreement on this. I'd like to work with you on this. So here's the opportunity, right? For years, we've done the right thing, and we have levied tariffs on illegally dumped and subsidized steel coming into the United States from countries like China. But we haven't always done the right thing for taconite pellets that feed those steel mills. And so the United States finds itself currently importing ores from foreign sources at the same times that these mines in Minnesota are idle. So my question is, do you think, Ambassador Greer, is there a way that we could think about this situation and get at this? And what are the opportunities to use our trade tools to support domestic taconite from the illegal and I think unfair trade practices that are hurting Minnesota's Iron Range?
So yes, and I appreciate your leadership on this issue. This is something where we can and should work together. I have spoken with some of these companies that are operating and want to operate in northern Minnesota. I think there are trade tools we can use because we are so import dependent right now on some of these inputs. I think if we phase something in a short period of time to signal to the market, domestic taconite is where it's at and where it's going to be,
right.
And so we can wean ourselves off over time.
Right. I would really like to work with you on that because I think it is an opportunity, and the ebbs and flows and the cycling of the taconite industry are a big burden. And I think we can be honest. There's no doubt that the way that the tariff regime has affected other manufacturing sectors in the United States, you might argue in the short run, I would maybe now argue differently, has had an impact on demand for domestic steel as well. And so I think there's an opportunity here. Let me see if I can get to the sugar question as well. You know about this as well. You and I have talked about this. Minnesota is one of the #1 sugar beet producing states in the nation, supporting over 20,000 jobs and a $3 billion economic impact just in Minnesota. And it's struggling right now. And as you no doubt know, we have a situation where there is a glut of global supply and from subsidized sugar, that sugar can be sold into the United States with the tariff, after tariff quota, and it's still sold into the United States at lower than the cost of goods sold for domestic sugar producers. And this is causing a lot of struggle in my northwestern part of the state, where producers are trying to figure out, do I sell my shares in the co-op, or do I plant beets that I know I'm going to lose money on, for the time being? So can you address this, Ambassador? And as you know, we sold, Senator Hoeven and Senator Slotkin, and I believe Chair Crapo signed this letter as well, raised this with you and Secretary Rollins about the opportunities to open a Section 301 investigation into this.
Yes, Senator. Again, this is an area where I think we can work together. I have conferred with the chairman and even the ranking member on these issues on sugar. So we are working very closely with the domestic industry right now to try to assess, their view of the unfair trading practices that might persist overseas. That's the legal basis for any Section 301. So we're committed to working with them. We're gathering a lot of information from them right now because we want to see action too.
That's great. And I think, timing is of the essence. We'll look forward to getting a more full report on your plans there, and look forward to working with my colleagues on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here. I want to talk a little bit about the aerospace and aviation industries. They, as you well know, they're critical to our country and supporting both our national defense and our tourism and economy. I am hearing concerns from many in this industry that the Section 232 investigation into imports of aircraft and aircraft parts is chilling investment and threatening some aerospace jobs. The administration hasn't yet shown the public any results of these investigations. Do you intend to release these investigations?
So thank you, Senator. This is a critical supply chain where we're quite focused. The investigation you're talking about is a Section 232 investigation under Commerce. I'll tell you what I know about it and then refer you to Commerce, of course. About, I think, 10 days ago, the President signed an action in this investigation saying, listen, this is critical. We are worried about imports. However, we would much rather negotiate with countries potential landing zones on this because it is so sensitive.
Can I ask you a question? Because I recognize it's in Commerce's role, but you're actually negotiating these trade agreements based on these reports, correct?
We work with the Commerce Department to get their input, so like any negotiation.
So these reports would be critical to your negotiations with trade, correct?
Yes. Yep.
So at some point in time, these reports are required under the law.
They exist, yes.
To be public. And so I guess that's my question. I'm assuming your access to this information is the result of an investigation that has been completed because you need it for trade negotiation. So once it's completed, it should be available to the American public. And that's my question. It may not be within your authority to release it, maybe the Commerce Department, but I would hope that you would convince them that they should at least follow the law and release these reports to the American public. And quite honestly, Congress has the results of these as well.
I'll raise it with the Commerce Secretary.
I appreciate that. Let me ask you about something that we have talked about quite often, and this is tourism. We talk a lot about a trade deficit in goods, which I so appreciate. But last year, for the first time in decades, the U.S. experienced a trade deficit in our largest service export, and that's tourism. And after running a trade surplus in travel in 2024, we actually experienced a $14 billion trade deficit in 2025. I have seen that in my home state of Las Vegas. We have seen that across the country, quite honestly. With your focus on the trade balance, what is your analysis of why this sharp drop in tourism has happened? Have you looked at this at all?
You've talked to us about this before, so it's something that we think about, and it falls into that bucket of services. And in the overall category of services, we've never exported more services before. But I know for you in Las Vegas particularly, this is an issue. We're hopeful that with the World Cup, we saw an uptick in the past couple of months. We think we've seen a lot of, when I've asked even domestic industry about it, airlines, credit card folks who are doing this, they've seen a lot of internal and domestic. So whether it's imports of tourism or domestic tourism, I think my goal is just make sure that places like Las Vegas are up and running. I'm happy to work with you more on this to identify things we can do. We can work with the Commerce Department on tourism promotion. They have their own bureau to deal with it.
So I appreciate that. Senator Moran and I have introduced legislation to include a travel and tourism working group in the USMCA. Would you commit to supporting that?
I will, yes,
Thank you.
100%, yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Let me talk a little bit about critical minerals. And I'm curious, you and I would both agree, critical minerals and critical mineral supply chain is important for this country, right? And so it's an area that I've worked in quite often and talked to you about, and I appreciate your comments. Let me ask you this, and just if you can provide some information. Indonesia has long been had a ban on the export of raw critical minerals such as nickel ore, which has resulted in massive Chinese investment in nickel refining in Indonesia. Last July, the White House released a joint statement with Indonesia regarding trade negotiations that said, quote, Indonesia will remove restrictions on exports to the United States of industrial commodities, including critical minerals. However, shortly after that release in that statement, multiple Indonesian officials, including their Minister of Economic Affairs, disputed that Indonesia would open its exports of raw minerals to the U.S. Again, there was another signing, a trade agreement in February. The White House made that same statement, and then Indonesia again said, no, that is not going to happen. So can you let us know, is Indonesia, are they agreeing to change its laws and regulations so that it will export raw ore to the U.S.? Where are we, and what is the status of that?
Thank you. This is really important to us, too, and we want to hold Indonesia's feet to the fire on this as well. What they have, like many countries, they have an export control regime, and they've committed to us to expedite that for us. You can imagine they don't want to be in a situation where everything they produce has to go to one country in the area, so they're trying to balance geopolitically what they're doing. They're working with us. We had a complaint once about some minerals not being able to be exported. We called the Indonesians. They took care of it right away. We have a good working relationship with them, so we just have to keep their feet to the fire to have them live up to these agreements.
Thank you. I know my time is up, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Welch.